Our New Testament Bible reading is Galatians chapter 5, verses 13 to 26, which is the end of the chapter. You, my brothers, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the sinful nature. Rather, serve one another in love. The entire law is summed up in a single command: love your neighbour as yourself. If you keep on biting and devouring each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. So I say, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. For the sinful nature desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the sinful nature. They are in conflict with each other, so that you do not do what you want. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. The acts of the sinful nature are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity and debauchery, idolatry and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions and envy, drunkenness, orgies and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the sinful nature with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking and envying each other.
We've been dealing with a lot of issues in our community, in our personal life, and I don't know, but in our family we've had various discussions about our approach to the pandemic and vaccinations and all of those sorts of things. And makes life interesting for family life, also for our community and people in work and those sorts of areas. Last time I spoke a couple of weeks ago, I talked about, do Christians have rights? I find going to the Bible is a surprising thing. You get answers when you go to the Bible that are different to what you think of. If you want to catch up with that, then you can look on Larry's website and catch up with that message. The question I want to ask is one that people are asking on our streets, placards and all sorts of things. They're talking about freedom. My question this morning is, are you free? Are you free? Am I free? We've had lockdowns, only 4 reasons why you could go out: for food, for care, for health and essential work. On the day after, on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, only people who are vaccinated will be able to go watch the cricket. Anyone want to go to the cricket this year? I might go one day. If you're interested, let me know. Newspaper headings scream out about the restrictions. There was a march yesterday in the city. What do we mean when you're talking about freedom? What do you mean when you're talking about liberty? Well, I thought I'd start with the Oxford Dictionary. This is what the Oxford Dictionary says about freedom. It's the right or power to act, speak or think as you want without hindrance or restraint. Actually, it up there. Liberty is the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life. The question is, are we ever free? I saw, you probably saw it, a film a while ago called Bruce Almighty. Bruce becomes God for the day, and he's in control of his community and so on and what happens. Jim Carrey is the main actor. And he was trying to answer everyone's prayers, and they were all coming through on the computer, and he was saying yes to these and no to these and yes to these and no to these. And eventually there were just so many he couldn't cope with it. He just said yes to everything. And everyone's prayers were being answered in the positive. Traffic lights at intersections were going off and on as people were praying. One would go red and the other would go green, and some were on amber, and all over the place. People were praying for the weather, that they'd have a wet day, and it was raining in some spots and there was sunshine in other spots, depending on people's prayers. The world was in total chaos. I was thinking about that, and I thought, freedom. What's the description of anarchy? And on your screen, the picture of the dogs is a picture of anarchy. You leave two dogs alone with cushions in the best room in your house, and this is what it might end up looking like. Everything everywhere. The description for anarchy is an absence of government and absolute freedom of the individual. Can I ask you, what's the difference between freedom and anarchy? They're basically the same, aren't they? Freedom and anarchy. No rules, no regulations. Everyone does exactly as they want. Do you want freedom like that? In the real world, there are always restraints on our freedom. Our family rules and regulations. A school always operates by rules. Our work situation operates by the way you do things. Our community, even a marriage relationship, you work out your own rules together as husband and wife. Seems to me if you were Robinson Crusoe on an island by yourself, you would still have rules. The conscience up there would be dictating about what you should do in certain instances. The story in the Bible, which we read before, reflects someone who went close to being free in the sense that the Oxford Dictionary is talking about. It's the story of Joseph as a young man of 17 years of age, favourite son of his father Jacob, born to his father's favourite wife. You imagine the dynamics in that family, what was happening. His older brothers were out working, herding the family sheep, roughing it in the desert. He was home with all of the luxuries of home life of a wealthy dad. He'd been given a coat of many colours for his 17th birthday, a symbol of his favouritism and his standing as far as his father was concerned. Joseph then had dreams about being out in the paddock with his brothers and his wheat sheaf standing upright and all the other wheat sheaves bowing down, the brothers' wheat sheaves bowing down before him. And he went to visit his brothers, and they were talking, telling stories around the campfire, and he said, I had a dream the other day, and you can imagine him doing it with a bit of a smile, and he tells his dream, and his brothers just wanted to kill him. Joseph then had another similar dream. This time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars all bowed down to him, and he got brave enough to tell his dad, and his dad was pretty miffed because obviously the sun and the moon were his father and his mother, and the 11 stars were his 11 brothers, and they're all bowing down to him. Weren't too happy. A young man with wealth, a father who thought the world of him, dressed as the best in the land, an easy life, servants to wait on him, proud of himself and good at dreaming what life might become for him, thinking that he was above his brothers. This is a picture of someone who was free and able to do as he pleased. And the question is this the kind of freedom that you and I are seeking? Is this the freedom that marchers in the last few months are screaming about on their banners? Let's go back to the Joseph story. Joseph's dad sent him out to the desert to check out on how his older brothers were going. And of course he was wearing his coat of many colours. And the brothers saw him coming. "Here comes that dreamer," they said. And they were full of anger and hate towards him. And Reuben, the oldest of the brothers, said to them, "Let's look after him, don't do too much damage to him." But Reuben left and it didn't count for much, and there was a well where they were. They threw him into the well, took his coat off. They killed, a goat, I think it was, and they put the blood on the coat and took it home to the dad. Some slave traders came along and they sold Jacob, their brother, to the slave traders, and they went off and they took this coat home to the dad. Of course, the dad was totally devastated. No one could console him, and he went into depression basically for the rest of his life. It was a terrible thing that Joseph's brothers did to him, wasn't it? But when you think about it, Joseph's pleasure and freedom, his sense of self-indulgence, was pretty hard to take. His brothers did most of the work around the place, spent weeks and weeks away from home. They got little or no recognition from their dad, who only had eyes for Joseph. And the thought of the favourite youngest son inheriting all the dad's wealth was something that really stuck. And they felt terribly difficult to handle. Their hurt turned to jealousy, then to anger, and then selling their brother into slavery, and then going home and spinning a yarn about what happened to him. When you think about it, self-indulgent freedom is not a good thing, is it? I don't like this kind of freedom. I think most people don't like that kind of freedom, except if they're on the receiving side and the benefits all come to them, and then we might have a different point of view. I believe there is a different kind of freedom, probably different kinds. I read a book, I Can Jump Puddles, by Alan Marshall. Anyone else ever read it? Okay. Alan had cerebral palsy and significantly affected his legs, and he struggled around wearing braces on his legs. One of the remedies in those days, way back then, to fix the cerebral palsy was to go and have treatment with a physiotherapist. And he would lie on the bed, and the physiotherapist would take his braces off and then start to push pressure down on his knees so that his legs would straighten out. And it was excruciatingly painful. He would scream. And this would happen for sessions of a period of time. And Alan talks about in his book, he said there was a photo on the wall, like the one you can see on the screen, of horses racing and galloping. And he would just look at that photo and imagine he was one of the horses and racing and galloping and free, totally free, leaving his pain behind and his cerebral palsy behind. You see, there are different kinds of freedoms. In a difficult situation that most people would see as hopeless, it is possible for a person to discover how to live in freedom. Let's go back to the Joseph story. Joseph was taken to Egypt and sold in slavery to Potiphar, who was an official of Pharaoh's court. And Joseph became a servant in Potiphar's house. But Potiphar noticed there was something significantly different about Joseph. There was something special about him. He saw that God was with him. Everything Joseph did, he did well and usually succeeded. Joseph, in fact, became Potiphar's personal attendant. And he promoted him to be in charge of his whole household. Later, he gave him responsibility of all the finances of his house and his business. Everything that he owned, Joseph was responsible for it. Even his farm prospered as a result of having Joseph around. But Joseph was a good-looking guy, and Potiphar's wife was obviously unhappy. And she tried over a period of time to establish a romantic relationship with him. Joseph resisted. He didn't want to betray his master. Eventually, she tried to take him to bed with her, and she grabbed hold of his coat, and he ran away and left his coat behind. When she got home, her husband got home, she said, "Look at what Joseph did," and showed the coat, and said, "He tried to rape me." Of course, Potiphar was just so angry, and he put Joseph into prison. Joseph was in prison, and the prison warden liked him. And he gave responsibility for all the prison to Joseph. Joseph basically ended up doing the same as with Potiphar. He became in charge of everything that happened into the prison. There were a cupbearer and a baker who were servants to Pharaoh, and they were in prison for I'm not sure what, but they both had dreams, and they didn't know what their dreams meant. And Joseph came in to their cell and said, "What are you guys looking so sad about?" And they started to tell him what their dreams were, and Joseph interpreted the dream for them. The dreams came true. The baker ended up serving Pharaoh again, just as Joseph had indicated that he would. For 2 years, he forgot about Joseph. But then one day, Pharaoh had a dream, 2 dreams actually, and he couldn't work out what they meant. And no one in his court was able to help him. And the cupbearer, who had been released and back in his position. Did I say baker before? It's a cupbearer. I got it wrong. The cupbearer remembered Joseph, and he said, "Oh, there's this guy in prison who was able to interpret my dream." And so Pharaoh said, "Well, bring him in." So they brought him in, showered him, got a shave, and dressed in finery. And Joseph was able to tell Pharaoh the outcome of the dream. There was going to be 7 years of good crops in Egypt, and then 7 years of famine. He suggested that they set someone up who would be in charge of the crops for the next 14 years and make sure that everything was looked after, the country was well provided for with food. Pharaoh said, "Well, who better than you?" And so he appointed him second in charge of all of Egypt. Joseph, a slave in Potiphar's house, ends up in charge. Joseph, a prisoner in an Egyptian jail, within a few years is running the place. Joseph, a prisoner, is seen as the wisest man in Egypt and promoted by Pharaoh to be second in charge of all of Egypt. Is this a different kind of freedom? Joseph had a freedom of mind and soul and spirit, and in tough times, in difficult situations that we'd all struggle with in those contexts that we've talked about, Joseph seemed to have a freedom which went beyond and above the circumstances that he found himself in. I would like to suggest that freedom is found through capitulation to God. I'd like to suggest to you that freedom that you and I are seeking for ourselves is found through a personal giving over of your life to God completely. To give up on any claim of personal freedom. What happened to change the selfish, spoiled brat Joseph into the selfless servant who brought life and success to everything he turned his hand to? What happened? How did that dramatic turnabout come about? It seems to me it happened in the well. Joseph was forced to listen to the anger and hurt he had caused his brothers, and they ate the lunch that he had brought to them, and they discussed him and how much they hated him, and he could hear them. He realised he had been thoughtless and selfish. He recognised that he had been full of himself and dominated by his own personal dreams. He realised that he had failed his brothers, his father and his family, and deserved what was happening to him. In that time in the well, on the trip as a slave down to Egypt, he acknowledged his failure to God and asked God to forgive him and to help him to change. From this point onward in the story, you read these comments about Joseph. In Potiphar's house, the Lord was with Joseph and he prospered, it says. His master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did. The Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was in everything that Potiphar had. Joseph in prison in Egypt. The Lord was with Joseph and he showed him kindness and granted him favour in the eyes of the prison warden. The Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. You see, Joseph admitted that he had messed up in his life, and he asked God's forgiveness and asked God to be with him and direct his life into the future. Joseph completely capitulated to God. He gave up on being the boss in his own life and asked God to take control. From that time on, he was free. Do you get it? He realised that life isn't about me. Life is about helping and serving other people. People like Potiphar, the prison warden, the cupbearer, and even Pharaoh, the king of a foreign country. Freedom comes through capitulation. My proposition is this: there is a freedom or liberty that comes from God to the man or the woman, which enables him or her to have faith in the worst and the most difficult of circumstances. And Paul spells it out in Galatians chapter 2 and verse 20. Paul says this: "Now I can live for God. I have been crucified with Christ, and now I live not my own life, but the life of Christ who lives in me." Do you get it? The life I now live in this body, I live in faith. Faith in the Son of God who loved me and who sacrificed himself for my sake. If you want freedom in your life, admit that you're stuffing up your life. Capitulate to God. God's Spirit will enter your life. You will be directed by him and you will be free. free to serve other people. Can I suggest that self-indulgence is not freedom? Who are the first people to demand freedom? Adam and Eve. First people that you read about in the Bible. Living in the paradise, which was the Garden of Eden. They only had one rule. You must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you'll die. They saw the fruit that it was good to eat. It was pleasing to the eye and desirable for gaining wisdom. Can you see the placards that they would have had if they'd been here today? Freedom for Eden. What's wrong with an apple? Assuming that the fruit was an apple. God is a dictator. Apples are good for your health. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. The issue in Eden wasn't the rule about apples, but who was in control. Were Adam and Eve prepared to live as God designed them to live? Or did they want to go it alone without God? They demanded freedom, absolute self-control, and paradise was lost. The argument about freedom, liberty, that you've been viewing on our streets, in our newspapers, on television, on Facebook, is the same issue as in the Garden of Eden. Who is in control? Is it our leaders in government, or is it me or you? Paul writes in his letter to the Galatian church, "My brothers, you are called, as you know, to liberty, but be careful, or this liberty will provide an opening for self-indulgence. If you go snapping at each other and tearing each other to pieces, you had better watch, or you will destroy the whole community." When self-indulgence is at work, the results are obvious. Fornication, gross indecency, sexual irresponsibility, idolatry and sorcery, and these are the ones that really concern us mostly, I think, as church people and as a community. Feuds, wrangling, jealousy, bad temper, quarrels, disagreements, factions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and similar things. I warn you now, says Paul, those who behave like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. A question. Tell me, do you think the marchers are free? Or will they be free if they gain what they want? I would suggest that they're far from free. Not because they are under unfair rules or regulations imposed by the government, which may or may not be true, but they are controlled by the inner anger and bitterness and hatred within their own hearts and minds. It's so easy to move from obedience to rebellion, and I know better than those folks on the streets. Can I tell you a story? There was, just after the last lockdown was imposed, it was the Monday afterwards, and just around the little Yarra Bridge on the main road, coming out of Yarra Junction towards Westburn, a whole big pile of mulch. And we're in lockdown, but it was only, for us it was sort of round the corner a bit, and I needed mulch, and I thought, oh, great opportunity, I can't do much else, I'll go down and get the mulch with my truck. So I got down there, and about 3 or 4 other people that had the same idea, and I waited for them to go. And so then me and the mulch and piled it on the truck, and about 3/4 of the way through filling up the truck, and this lady came along, and she started talking. It was a neighbour to Margaret and Owen, and she kept on talking, and I struggling to get the truck filled. And this blue car came. Two officers got out of the car and said, "We're from Yarra Junction Police Station. Is this within the 4 reasons as to why you should leave your home?" And I said, "Well, no." And he said, "Well, you realise I could fine you for this?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I won't fine you this time, but I suggest that you quickly hop in your car, finish packing up and hop in the car and go home." And I proceeded to do that. You see, the problem lies within each of us. Even as Christians who follow Jesus, we still want control. We still want to move outside of the rules and regulations that are applied for us. We do not always walk by the Spirit. I knew that I shouldn't go and get that mulch. I knew it was breaking the law. When you or I demand our freedom, it is reflected throughout our lives. We will bring these inner destructive forces into every aspect of our lives, to our families, to our friends, in our community, to our church. Franklin Roosevelt said this about humankind: "Man was born free, and everywhere he is in chaos." Man is born free, and everywhere he is chaos. I'm taking more time than what I expected. Did Joseph's story at the age of 30, Joseph became governor of all Egypt. 7 years of famine, 7 years of prosperity before that. During that time, his brothers came down to Egypt because they ran out of food too. And they fronted up to Joseph, but they didn't know it was Joseph. But Joseph recognised them. And they bowed down to him. Imagine the fulfilment of the dream, bowed down to him and said, "We're here for food." Joseph made life a bit difficult for them. But in the finish, I'm cutting the story, but in the finish, this is what happened. Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." And when they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there's been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no ploughing and reaping. But God sent me ahead to you to preserve you, a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by great deliverance." And it says, "And then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him weeping. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And afterwards his brothers talked with him." Paul says in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 6, "What matters is faith that makes its power felt through love." This truth was lived out in the life of Joseph and his brothers. "God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God." Freedom is found through the power of faith, says Paul, in what God is doing in the circumstances that you're living in. Believing God is in control. Understanding that God intends to bring about good outcomes. Appreciating that God has a plan for the future. Freedom is found through forgiveness. Freedom is found through reconciliation. Freedom is found in warm hugs and tears as Jacob and his brothers came together. Freedom is found in generosity. Freedom is not found in marches with angry placards. Freedom is not found in angry shouting. Freedom is not found in aggressive demands. Freedom is not found in calling people names. Freedom is not found in violence. Freedom is not found in mumbles and grumbles. When you follow God, and you have God in your life, I'll just quickly move over this one. That's Gary Abbott in his younger days. If you are led by the Spirit, no law can touch you, says Paul in Galatians. Gary would play and no player could touch him. He was here, there and everywhere. And his dad was just as bad. They could touch him, but you couldn't get him off his feet. He wouldn't move. He was so solidly built. That's a picture of how you can be in difficult circumstances if you have the Spirit of God in your heart and the Spirit of God in your life. You can't be moved. You can't be moved because God is with you. I want to finish with this overhead. I want to say freedom is operating as God designed you to operate. Freedom is not anarchy, as we started off with, but freedom is working and living as God planned for you to be. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. My grandmother and grandfather's clock, on the right of a picture of it. When I inherited the clock, it wasn't working. I checked it out, but there was no way I understood how the internals of a vintage clock operated, and no one else seemed to know either. It sat there and looked impressive and received lots of favourable comments about the clock, but it still wasn't work. It was right twice a day, but that was about it. I kept saying to Brigitte, I need to get a grandfather clock specialist who can help us to fix it. But they were very rare, and I was a bit worried how expensive they might be as well, being a bit of a tightwad. And Brigitte came home one day from the op shop and said she met a man in the op shop who fixes clocks, and he's offered to fix the clocks for free for the op shop, which he's been doing. And she told him about our grandfather clock, and he said, oh, I'd love to have a look at it. So he came and had a look. He pulled it out, the clock out of it, all the works and so on, and looked at it, and he said, oh, do you have a needle, you know, the needles you use for sewing and so on? Brigitte said, yeah, and she brought it out, and he snipped off the end, put it in a certain spot in the clock, and put it all back together again, and we had a working grandfather clock within half an hour. We happily paid him for the time. And now I maintain the clock. It operates on weights, you know, the weights, 3 weights, and they come down when they get to the bottom of the glass. I'll pull them up again and so on. It's good when you have blackouts because you can still tell the time. You don't have to rely on electricity to tell the time. But the clock is now working as its designer intended it to work. It is free and operates smoothly. The really good thing is, as I said, that even when everything else goes, the clock is operating well because it's operating as it was designed to do. When self-indulgence is at work in a man or woman, we know that the person is not operating as he or she was designed by their maker. The indications of being out of whack are obvious, and they are these: feuds and wrangling, jealousy, bad temper, quarrels, disagreements, and factions, and all the other stuff as well. Like the grandfather clock, when we are displaying any of these symptoms, we need a major repair. Yep. The broken bits need replacing, and the person, you or me, needs a major overhaul. We need to allow ourselves to be taken over again by God and renewed by His Spirit. You see, Jesus is the repairer and the renewer. Only He can fix you or me, as He was the original designer. You and I need to ask God's Spirit inside of us to daily oil our irritations, to keep us on task, to tick to our Maker's timing, to produce a life which points other people back to their Maker so that they too can run their lives as they were designed to live. When our face and our hands express love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, then you and I know that we are free. We are operating as God designed us to be. Like Joseph so long ago, we'll be free to bring joy, life, and happiness to people in our world, to the Potiphars, to the cupbearers, to the Pharaohs, to the brothers, to the fathers. That is your calling. That's what you are designed for by God. My question, again, to finish, is this: are you free? I'm going to have an opportunity. I didn't check with you before, Larry, about this, but we're going to sing a hymn. But if God's been speaking to you through His Spirit, and you've been struggling with this whole issue of freedom and liberty, and you recognise that you need to ask God's Spirit into your life in full and a fresh way, then after the singing of the hymn and after the benediction, you might want to come to the front and sit down there. I'd love to pray with you, or Larry to pray with you, and just ask God again to refill you with His Spirit so that you can operate as God designed you to operate. So I'll leave you with that. Are you free?